Welcome to Through the Lens of Christ, a podcast designed to have conversation about things that are happening in culture, questions that we may have theologically, and other questions that impact our day in and day out lives. Our desire is to be able to build these conversations and to be able to get us to critically think, not just about the events that are happening, but how do we see these events through the lens of Christ. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I hope it helps you to critically think through issues in our lives. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Adam.
How are you doing?
I'm okay.
Yeah.
A little cobwebby this morning, but I'm doing okay.
Yeah, I think that's a fair description over here on this side too. Good morning, Ashley.
Good morning.
We this morning are going to go through a lot of verses. We kept this whole text together because I think it just speaks well together and clarifies each other. So we're going to go through it. So Steve will read it if he would be so kind, and then we'll begin to talk about some of the cobwebby things in our minds.
We'll give it a try. The ESV starts off this section with a kingdom that cannot be shaken. That's not the scripture. That's just their comment on this section. So starting in verse 18 of chapter 12. For you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire, and darkness, and gloom, and a tempest, and the sound of a trumpet, and a voice whose words made the hearers beg that no further messages be spoken to them. For they could not endure the order that was given. Quote, if even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. End quote. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. But you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. See that you do not refuse him who is speaking. For if they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will we escape if we reject him who warns from heaven. At that time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, yet once more I will shake not only the earth but also the heavens. This phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of things that are shaken, that is, things that have been made, in order that the things that cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire.
Amen.
I almost got through that without a major error of reading it, but
It was just a minor.
Yeah, that's
okay.
It
was pretty good.
Okay.
It wasn't worth redoing.
Not yet.
So yeah, no, it was good.
This whole podcast might be worth redoing in a second, but we'll see how it goes.
So what stands out to you, right? There's a lot of text here. There's a lot of descriptions about who God is and how we come to him, and what stands out.
The Lord's holy. Holiness
Yeah.
of the Lord.
Yeah.
At the beginning and the end of this thing, and I'm sure in the middle all the way through it too,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And the charge that we should have some fear here and some reverence.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's the idea of, like you said, this holiness and this gap that exists between us and God, right? That there's no way we're going to make ourselves holy, and not just that. Well, God's holy and we're not, so you know what? It's fine. It says you're coming to a mountain that if you touch it, you'll be stoned, right? If you touch it, you're going to die. Mm-hmm. And I mean those are pretty big words about the holiness of God compared to our natural state.
If you don't mind, could you give the two mountain parallel that you did in the sermon, because you mentioned the mountain too. Like, where does the mountain beginning and end? You mentioned that in the sermon. I'm like, that's a great question, right? Well, apparently it ended down below where they were doing all kinds of stuff, right? Somewhere between there and where Moses was. But if you don't mind,
yeah. Well, I think the first mountain is really the description of what we see in Exodus 19. And so, Moses is receiving the law. God's coming down to give it. The people had no idea how to live. I mean, again, we talk about this understanding of who God is, and we have some frame of reference, but they really didn't have any idea of what holiness meant or how they were supposed to live. Or so God's saying, okay, I'm going to show you what you need to do, and not even to be holy, but to live to my standards of holiness. And so he comes down on the mountain, and essentially, from what we read in Exodus 19, basically consumes the mountain. Just does anything it touches, because it's all been tainted by sin, he just consumes it. And that's just a awe-inspiring. Like, if I were there, I can't imagine the fear I'd have when God's presence, and you know that it's God's presence coming down. He comes down on the mountain and just consumes it. And the imagery is that is the first mountain, right? That's how we used to approach God, with complete fear, which isn't a bad thing, right? Understand the holiness of God, but also knowing we have no way to get close to him. We can't approach the mountain. He says, if you touch the mountain, and that's where we're saying, where does it begin and end? He says, don't touch the mountain. I don't know where it begins and ends.
One
right?
dirt particle is next to the other dirt particle, all the way to my feet.
Yeah. So, but he says, if you touch it, you're going to die. And so the people just, fled, basically. And then they said, hey, we need some idols down here, once he called Moses up. And
which is amazing too, if I could just interrupt.
Yeah.
Moses gets to go on the mountain, which
amazing.
is not anything to do with him.
Right.
Let's face it, right? It's all
Yes.
to do with God changing, making him the person that he needed to be on the mountain, so he could be there with him. But anyway, go ahead.
Right.
I'm sorry.
And then, so that's the general frame up of the first mountain. And then the second mountain is, what happens in between Exodus 19 and Hebrews 12 is Christ. So he says Christ actually ushers us into a different mountain. And so God comes down into this earth, into the corruption, into the mess, and has to consume it in order to be present. Or we go through the path of Christ, which takes us up to heaven into where God is, and says, okay, now come in, and now we see the angels rejoicing. We see people that have gone before us. We see God himself as the judge of all, who never stops judging. We see Christ himself and the mediator, and I think it's just this great dichotomy of no different gods, right? It's one God, but we have two approaches.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm glad you did that. Thanks for that. Because I was thinking when I was listening to the message, because I wasn't at church, I was traveling at the time, but I was listening in the car. I was thinking of the first mountain is God comes down to the mountain, consumes the mountain, and goes away.
Yeah,
I mean, right? Yeah. He goes away and leaves the tablets and leaves Moses to come down and be God's emissary to the people and all that, which is kind of so it's an outside in kind of a thing. And then Jesus coming. It's like, okay, now he's in. He's part of the world too, right? So it's like an inside-out thing. Yeah. It's almost like an infection, right? He comes down and infects the world, and I just see the spider web of spirit working itself out into the world as he renews, undoes the curse, right? He starts changing that back, and he starts with people's hearts and infects the people's hearts, which all infect the way we do things, and infects everything about the world. In big and little ways, really big way, really, even though it looks very little and very inconsequential at times. It's not inconsequential.
Right. Well, and I like the theological aspect. You, at least I think sometimes, okay, why did Jesus have to be? Right? I mean, if God wants to redeem everything, he just can, right? Like, why is this the path? Why is this the plan? And but you begin to see how great God's holiness is, right? He's not going to be able to redeem the world without essentially destroying it, right? Consuming it.
Right.
And so Christ has to come as both man and God, and so that he can be in this world, and to your point, can begin to infect this world and deliver something that is extremely contagious and bring it to us. And then he says, now I'm inviting you with me. And whereas you said, when God visits us, he comes down, he consumes, and he leaves. And it's such a significant difference, a point of hope.
I think there's evidence in what you said is the angels rejoicing over the infection of Christ, right? So surely the angels were really happy that God came down to the first mountain with it. They're not upset, right? But when Christ comes, the angels are, and when he infects, the angels are rejoicing. They're like, yes, I just imagine them from a distance going, this defiled planet This with
Yep.
all these men and all the animals and the plants that has been defiled by man, God is making right now, and how excited that they can see the end coming, or the new beginning coming of the new heavens and the new earth. It's going to be cleaned up and changed and purified.
Yeah, and they have such a unique perspective,
Don't
right?
they, though?
And so as I think about their rejoicing in Revelation. You look at I think it's Revelation chapter 5, where they're just talking about how worthy is the Lamb, and because they see the mess, right? They see they have an inside view into heaven and God's holiness and His presence, and then they also see this mess that is. And so when Christ comes to they're rejoicing in wow. Look at what He's doing. Look at what He's ushering in. Yeah.
That brings something to mind, if I could just diverge a little bit. So I think of us, okay, so we're here infecting the world and moving out. God's grace comes through us and meets others. But look at the battle that we're in our world, just socially. I was just listening to a recording on the way in, kind of a daily thing. It's Al Mohler's daily briefing that he has. And he's talking about transgenderism again and all that's going on with that. He's talking about, I guess in the news, is this Boston hospital doing, transgender surgeries on adolescent children and advertising for it and all that. I'm like, the Lord is through us pushing out into the world, infecting the world again with goodness and with purity and holiness and love. And we've got the world really fighting back hard. I mean, they're not just laying down. I mean, they are working really hard to push back on, oh no, this is our world, and we're going to design it in the way we want to, and we're going to design ourselves in the way we want to, and nobody and no God is going to come against it. And so the battle, I feel like the battle is getting more intense and clarified, and certainly, I think you probably agree with this, over the last couple of years, a lot of clarification has come, and the battle has become much more obvious.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think you just see that, and we're living in the end times, right? And so I don't know, define what that means, right? But we know that ever since Christ left, we've been living in the end times, right?
Right.
But you can just feel this progression. And as I said on Sunday, I don't know if we've got 3 hours or 1,000 years left. I have no idea. But I know that this progression that we're on is going to continue. And we may have some peaks and valleys, right? I hope, but I think we see in history that there are points of revival that come out of these times. And, we've got to live through this mess, and it might be in 100 years where we're able to look back and go, hey, all that happened, and then look how God moved in it. And so that's all good. But you can absolutely see that the world is just fighting for control, and that they almost want to approach the first mountain, right? They're like, I'm comfortable with my greatness that I'm willing to stand toe to toe with God and say we were right. And you just the thought process, you look at it and you don't understand it because you have unveiled eyes, and they're blind to it. They have they don't have any idea that the mountain's even holy. They don't have any idea that where they're headed, right? And it's both a shame and it's infuriating and it's frustrating, and especially when you see it done to the kids, right? Where there's this hold being taken so early, it's heartbreaking.
I mean, I'm just like, they're taking healthy children and making them unhealthy, removing healthy body parts that'll never be there again.
Right.
I mean, that they're affecting these kids for the rest of their lives. How long or maybe short they're going to be.
Right.
It's just amazing. I just can't. I'm honestly. Well, I'm going to go off on more of a tangent. We've been fighting this abortion battle for decades, right?
Yep.
What is happening? What's happening now is almost as bad. That the children aren't dead yet, but we're just it's an amazing distortion of God's created order. And it's another step too far. And the amazing thing that I see is, I mean, some people see it, right? I believe believers see it. They do have eyes that are able to see spiritual things, both spiritually good and healthy things and spiritually unhealthy things. But the world is really dark.
Yeah,
it's a dark place right now, and it's encroaching in our churches, and it's causing a lot of difficulty that people can't see their way out of that.
Right.
Even through nature or just common grace, that seems to be washed away or hidden right now.
Right.
And I think believers are seeing it, and it's a real challenge. I mean, same thing we're talking about in this text. Christ comes down, and we have spiritual eyes to see what he's been doing and what's going on if we're believers.
Yeah, and I think the natural progression then is, what do we do, right? Like, where are we going to go? And I think I'm encouraged with us as a body, even what we believe is the right thing to do in Kewaskum, and how we're just even praying through, like, is there an option for a school, and what is God doing? And I look at how we both need to impact each other, but also our kids, right? Sure. We on Sunday, we left. We had the open house over at the school, and Jenny bought a antique sewing machine from some that we desperately needed.
I'm sure.
And so we go to Delafield, and you never have any idea. You buy stuff. We've been all over the place, all kind of people's houses, and you just don't know what you're walking into, right? And so as we're nice community over in Delafield, nice houses, and we
that's a high-end community.
Yes, right. And so we go in, pull into the driveway, just walk up, and so they have two crosses in their little garden as you kind of walk up, right? And the one says Jesus is Lord, and so they're not just like decorative, right? They're making a declaration. And so we walk up to the door and just kind of open up some good conversation, right? Sure. But they were in the process, and again, wealthy area. And they were like, hey, our church is, it was a Lutheran church and school, but they were going through a big addition and trying to put a lot of money into the school, because the school had gone from 80 kids to 200 kids over the last couple of years, right?
Sure.
And so he was just talking about that they didn't have any kids that age, and he said, we're selling everything here that's all this antique, all this stuff that might be worth something. We're selling it all so we can give it to the church, because we need the kids to know that CRT and gender fluidity and all the lies that they're being taught are not real. And we will do whatever it takes to actually combat that. And I was like, that's the kind of passion that we need, right? Is that how do we actually understand that we're not here to solve the problem, right? And there's a balance there, right? We're not here to solve the problem, but man, we certainly have a responsibility to bring the gospel message.
Yeah, we need to be speaking the truth in any context that happens, right? Someone approaches us and they're like, man, we're starting this school because of this, and we're like, well, good for you, right?
Yes.
That's good. We all have different places to enter into that conversation, and as they come to us, we should be entering into them, and certainly in an individual level, moving, having a church plant in Kewaskum so that we can impact more people for the Lord, which means showing them Christ, handing forth Christ, showing them who Jesus is, and from there, their hearts being changed so that they can know the truth and then act on the truth.
Right. And it means being willing to say, look, we're fairly far down the path, but if God moves us in a different direction,
sure,
it's to be right. And I think that, and that's hard for me, right? I mean, I want to control everything, and I want to tell God how we're going to bring people to the mountain, and this is what we're going to do. But it's God's just going, I'm in control, and I'm later in the text, right? I'm shaking everything. Right, this whole concept of just I'm shaking it, and there's going to come a final shaking, but in between, I think he's shaking all of it. Mm-hmm. And how do we get comfortable with the shaking so that we actually embrace what's firm and bring that wherever we're enabled to bring it?
That shaking seems to be taking control out of my hands and putting it in God's hands, right? So that things come at us, and then how do we respond to that? Do we respond with high anxiety, or do we respond with kind of more determined, I don't know, what would you say, determined effort to continue to love Jesus even through the difficult times? Talking to a friend of mine, he's like, hey, we need to be fighting sin. I'm like, you bet we need to be fighting sin. Well, how do we fight sin? Not in an angry, morbid way. Yep. We fight sin because we love Christ, and we're happy fighters. Yep. We're happy warriors, not, not belligerent, degrading, grumpy warriors. Right. So I think we do both at the same time, and that's part of that, just that mindset of engagement. That we're not filled with anxiety. We're filled with hope and peace and understanding of the future, who we are, where we are in the times, and we engage the culture where they are. Again, without anxiety, with love and with furor,
right,
in a healthy way.
Yeah, and I think, like, back to the text, he says that second mountain, this is where we're going, right? Mm-hmm. And we should want as many people as possible to join us on that path to that mountain, that second mountain, right? I think about, you're talking about, like, not with anxiety, and Paul continually uses references to athletic endeavors, right? Races, boxing, right? Mm-hmm. Just physical effort filled, right? So there is this determination that should be within us that's driving us, but it's like we're going onto the field knowing we've already won. Right. And so we don't have to go out anxious thinking, oh man, am I going to win today? Or is like that's all been removed. If you were going to play a football game and you were told you're guaranteed to win, it changes how you approach it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we lost the idea, or at least I tend to, that it's already been won. Right. Christ is victorious. He's invited us up the mountain. My job isn't to go win anything. My job is to make sure we actually reveal the victory to people.
I got a friend of mine, he keeps telling me every time I start talking this way, he goes, Steve, it's all done.
Right.
It's all completed. It's finished. We don't have to worry about it. I'm like, man, you're right.
Yeah.
The opposite of that, I'm here. I'll tell a story of my dad. Here's my dad's way of getting things done. Like if he was making an effort to accomplish something and it wasn't going well, he literally would work himself up into an anger, right, to get some adrenaline flowing so he could perform at a different level. And he encouraged that in us kids as I was kids. Like, if you get mad at it, you'll get it to happen. I'm like, that is not the way I want to teach and live my life and teach my children. I mean, he taught me some other good things, but that was not a good thing.
Yeah.
It was interesting, little side note, I found out that he thought that way since he was in high school. I read a letter from him that he wrote to a teacher for a class, and he expressed that's how he got things done. I'm like, wow, that's pretty amazing.
Right.
Yeah, but some people live their lives that way, in a state of anger and frustration, and that's how they accomplish the purposes that they see fit.
Yep. Yeah, because you're doing it on your own.
Absolutely.
So
it's all me, man.
Right. So I just got to muster up enough, whatever that is, right? Anger, gumption, frustration, whatever, and I'm going to get it done. And that's the beauty and the confusing part of the gospel message, is that we're not really doing it. Right? It's God in us, through us. We're being submissive to what he's doing and being obedient, and then we're doing it. And so there's a part of action, right? Peter in 2 Peter says that we participate in the divine nature. So we're participating, but it's the divine nature that's moving us.
Right. So we're definitely participating, and the evidence we're participating in the right direction is, I think, what do we love and what is the outcome? What's the fruit?
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think, and I sometimes we can see fruit. Just to go off on another, I feel like I'm full of tangents here, but we can see fruit, and fruit. I mean, we can see that same kind of fruit in lots of people that aren't Christians. So that fruit can look just like a general morality. That love of Christ has to be there too. So it's love of Christ, I think, and fruit that looks moral and right.
Well, and sorry not to cut in, but on that fruit idea, I just got the image right. We're talking about fruit. We're talking about things that are shaken, and so you think about when a tree gets shaken, right? It gets blown by the wind. Fruit falls to the ground. What happens to it, right? It rots.
It does.
And so we're called to be fruit, but the fruit that is good. There's a lot of fruit that can look like it's right, but it's going to be shaken, and it's going to be tested for what it is, and it's going to end up being rotten. But it's the fruit that actually stays connected to the branch that is going to be the fruit that prevails through the shaking.
Yeah, that's good, which also kind of correlates to fruit over time. Knowing someone, the way they act, the way they love. I'm going to go back to relationship and knowing people and understanding them and working together for the good. These are things that we should be doing.
Yes. Yeah, so I think this text can be both of this frightening hammer of this God's angry and wrathful and judgmental and right? I mean, like, his holiness is opposed to sin, right? That doesn't, just because there's a new mountain doesn't make that mountain false, right? Mm-hmm. It's still true. But we've been given something greater. We've been given hope and mercy and compassion and grace. And God loves us so much that he sent his son, that we don't have to meet him on that mountain of where he's consuming it. He's consuming us in a whole different way, consuming us in his love and his grace and his mercy.
He's been consumed so that we don't have to be consumed.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Adam.